It was supposed to be another carefully managed media appearance from Melania Trump, the kind of morning television spot that her team had curated to be soft, safe, and scripted. With a host who would ask the kind of questions that could be answered in pleasant, vague sound bites, the studio lights glowed warmly. The makeup team had worked their practiced magic, and Melania's expression was the practiced hybrid of polite indifference and distant elegance that had carried her through years of public scrutiny without giving anything away. She had walked onto the set expecting to talk about a new children's initiative, some lukewarm anecdotes from her time as First Lady, perhaps a few carefully phrased comments about the future. But then Jasmine Crockett walked in. No one on Melania's team had been told she would be there. The producers had kept it under wraps, knowing the ratings' power of unpredictability. And as Jasmine strode toward the interview table, wearing that sharp, calculated smile that meant she knew something the rest of the world didn't yet, the air in the studio seemed to thicken. Melania's eyes flickered for just a fraction of a second. That imperceptible break in her composure that only the most trained observers would catch, and Jasmine saw it. She took her seat, greeting the host with a gracious nod before turning directly to Melania with the kind of politeness that felt almost surgical. "It's nice to finally meet you," Jasmine said. The words dripping with a double meaning Melania could already feel pressing against her ribs. The conversation began, innocuously enough, the host moving through the standard small talk. But Jasmine had a way of sliding her voice into the gaps, a tone shift here, a quick interjection there, as if she were laying a trap brick by brick. And then, without warning, Jasmine leaned forward slightly and said it, not shouted. It's not announced with fireworks, but delivered in a calm, measured voice that somehow made the words even more devastating. "I've recently come into possession of documents verified, authenticated, that outline the terms of your marriage in a way that, well, let's just say the American public might be surprised to learn the truth." The host froze. The crew members went still. And for a split second, Melania seemed carved from marble, only her eyes betraying the faintest flicker of panic. It wasn't the fact that Jasmine had said it. It was the fact that she had proof. For years, rumors about her marriage had swirled in tabloids and gossip columns, dismissed as idle speculation. But the phrase verified, authenticated hit like a bullet. Melania's carefully constructed facades in the making was suddenly under siege, live on air, with nowhere to run. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer, buying herself seconds, her mind spinning through exit strategies. She could deny it outright, feign ignorance, or laugh it off as nonsense. But Jasmine was already speaking again, her voice steady, each syllable deliberate, her gaze locked like a laser on Melania's face. "We both know," Jasmine continued, "that this marriage wasn't built on the fairy tale narrative you've sold to the public. And the specifics when they come out will make clear just how much of your story has been manufactured." A camera operator shifted position, catching the side profile of Melania's clenched jaw, the slight tension in her shoulders. Inhaled, slow but sharp, the kind of breath someone takes when they're deciding between fight or flight. The audience at home couldn't hear the pounding in her ears, the rush of adrenaline surging through her chest, or the way every instinct she had was screaming to shut this down. But here, under the glare of the lights in front of a national audience, there was no shutting it down, not without making it worse. And that was the genius of Jasmine Crockett's move. She hadn't revealed the details yet. She had simply lit the match, tossed it onto the table, and sat back to watch the fuse burn. Melania could feel the heat creeping up the back of her neck. But her face remained a mask of control honed over decades of public life, the kind of expressionless shield that had gotten her through awkward campaign appearances, whispered insults, and relentless tabloid gossip. Yet this wasn't the same game. This was different. Jasmine Crockett didn't have the air of someone bluffing for attention. She radiated the unnerving confidence of a person holding a royal flush while the other player was still hoping for a pair. The host, clearly rattled, tried to steer the conversation back to safer territory, but Jasmine was having none of it. "You see," she said, leaning back in her chair like someone savoring the moment, "marriage is supposed to be a partnership of trust. And yet, I have evidence showing that certain agreements were made. Agreements not about love, not about mutual respect, but about power, influence, and silence. Melania's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the edge of the table. She wanted to speak, to dismiss this as yet another baseless attack from a political opportunist. But every time she opened her mouth in her mind's rehearsal, she could hear Jasmine's likely response, a smug, calm reminder that she had documents. The control Melania was so desperate to maintain was slipping. Not just because of the accusation, but because she knew deep down that Jasmine wasn't bluffing. She thought back to the early days, to the contracts signed behind closed doors, to the cold, calculated negotiations that had defined the foundation of her marriage, things never meant for the light of public scrutiny. Her lawyers had assured her those files were sealed, buried, impossible to trace back to her. Yet here Jasmine was, not only implying their existence, but alluding to the details in a way that made Melania's stomach knot, some would say. Jasmine continued, her voice low and deliberate, that the truth has a funny way of surfacing no matter how deep you bury it. And when the public learns what I've learned, they'll see a very different picture of you and your husband. The studio was silent, except for the faint hum of the lights overhead, the air so tense it felt like it might snap. Melania's mind raced for countermeasures. She could threaten legal action, live on era, bold move that would at least make her look decisive, but that ran the risk of inviting Jasmine to reveal even more in retaliation. She could try to mock Jasmine's credibility, to paint her as a fame chaser, but that too was risky. The woman across from her had an ironclad reputation for standing her ground under political fire. Worse still, Melania knew that once something like this was said on live TV, it would spread like wildfire online before the cameras even stopped rolling. By the time she left the studio, millions would have clipped and shared the moment, dissecting her every twitch and blink, and the speculation would be relentless. She was trapped in a cage of her own making, and the woman holding the key was sitting across from her, watching every micro-expression with predatory precision. She forced a tight smile, the kind that was meant to say, "I'm unbothered," but in truth felt like a splinter digging deeper under her skin. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, as if amused by the attempt at composure. And Melania realized in that instant that whatever meltdown might come was no longer a matter of if, but when. Jasmine's words had been the opening salvo, and Melania could already feel the war breaking out in her chest. The moment Jasmine's words sank fully into the minds of everyone in that studio, it was as if an invisible wave passed over the room, shifting the very air around them. Even the camera operators, usually trained to be mechanical extensions of their equipment, seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to keep a tight shot on Melania's face or to pull back for the broader drama unfolding. Melania sat motionless, but internally, every nerve was screaming. Her mind wasn't just replaying what Jasmine had said. It was running through the chain reaction those words would set off once the world digested them. She could see the headlines, already spinning, multiplying, mutating in real time, and each one was a dagger aimed at the fragile narrative she had spent years building. The danger wasn't just in the facts themselves, but in how people would feel about them. Perception was everything in politics and celebrity. And Jasmine Crockett had just planted a seed of doubt so potent it would bloom overnight into something unstoppable. Still, Melania wasn't ready to fold. She adjusted her posture, lifted her chin slightly, and spoke for the first time since the bombshell had dropped. "This is ridiculous," she said, her accent curling tightly around the words, her tone firm but not yet raised. "Would you come here with gossip and lies because you have nothing else?" It was a calculated move dismissal with a hint of indignation, but Jasmine's reaction was unnervingly serene. She didn't flinch, didn't rush to counter. Instead, she let the silence breathe, forcing Melania's denial to hang in the air long enough for everyone watching to wonder whether it was defense or deflection. "Funny thing about lies," Jasmine finally said, her voice low, "they unravel when the truth walks in the room." Then she reached into the sleek leather portfolio she'd brought with her. The movement was slow, deliberate, and Melania's pulse surged in her ears as she watched. Inside, Jasmine pulled a small stack of papers, just enough to suggest weight, but not so thick as to be unwieldy, and set them on the table between them. She didn't push them forward, didn't wave them around for the cameras. She simply rested her fingers on the top page, like a predator letting its prey see. The teeth without yet biting? These, she said, are excerpts from your own legal agreements. And before you deny them, you should know they've been cross-verified by independent analysts and corroborated by sources who were in the room when they were signed. Melania's breath caught, but she forced her expression to remain still. She knew what was in those agreements, knew the clauses about personal appearances, about scripted interactions, about what would happen if certain marital optics were not maintained. They were the kind of details that could turn the public's perception from indifference to outrage overnight. In that moment, Melania's fight-or-flight response tilted heavily toward flight. But her pride wouldn't allow her to get up and walk off the set. That would be an admission of weakness, and weakness was a currency she couldn't afford to spend. But she could feel something breaking inside. Heard the first crack in a dam she had reinforced for years. And Jasmine, seeing it press just a little further, "You built a brand on an image," she said softly, "but images fade. The truth doesn't." Melania's jaw tightened, her nails digging into the underside of the table out of view. She was one sentence away from snapping. One breath away from the kind of uncalculated eruption that would be replayed on every network and platform within hours. The tension was no longer just in the air, it was in her blood, in the heat behind her eyes, in the way her voice threatened to tremble if she spoke again. The audience at home couldn't see it yet, but those in the room could feel it. The meltdown was coming.